in this series of sessions. So today we are going to see about server-side integration and server-side communication. So if I'm not wrong, you all went through the routing, right? Last week routing happened. Services and factories also covered. Only if you know that it will be comfortable for you to continue with this session. So on the server-side integration, what we are going to see today means first we will see what is the server-side communication, why it is required. Then we will see which mode of server-side communication happens, or which mode of server-side communication is comfortable doing with AngularJS. And finally, we will see what are the different ways of communicating with the backend, which already comes with Angular. It's a pretty simple session, easier work compared to the earlier ones. But only if you know about server-side integration properly, it will be helpful to get data from the backend and properly manipulate it. Because sometimes what happens, even when people are using AngularJS application, they'll manually write some AJAX calls and all, which will take a lot of time to fetch data from the backend, as well as not an optimal way to fetch the data. So with AngularJS, what are the available things? We'll see in the last part. So today's agenda is going to be, we are first going to see about the background introduction of what server-side communication is. Then second important topic is XHR request, which is nothing but XML HTTP request. You might have heard about this earlier. Then we will see about the REST concept. What is REST? How it differs from other way of communication. And then we will see how to handle basic CRUD operations with AngularJS using Web APIs. Then we will see what are the inbuilt services available with AngularJS to communicate with the backend. And finally, we'll see what are promises. I think you would have seen promises, right? Okay, no problem. So we'll see what are promises, how we are going to handle promises with AngularJS, and we'll see some real-time examples. So before going into server-side communication, first we want to know what is the role of AJAX in web applications. All of you must have used AJAX, right? So why we need AJAX in any web application? What is its role? What it does? Extra dynamic contents.
If you want to only change some portion of your web page, then use Ajax. Like we have scoring website now, like cricket scoring website. There only some part of the website changes. So for that you can use Ajax.
So, but if we have a HTML page where we want to fetch all the data to the page, should I avoid going with Ajax? So there must be a criteria, right? In this situation, you should go with Ajax. What is the basic criteria? Without page load. That's the answer. So without page load, if you want to fetch data from backend, without user's knowledge, if you want to change the data of your page, go with Ajax. So Ajax is actually a basic concept over which the Angular services are built. So it's not like something new that we are going to do with AngularJS. So basically, whatever Ajax does, the same thing which we are also going to do with Angular with its services, but in a more optimized way. So as you see in the screen, Ajax is the heart of single page application, no doubt about it. Because for any single page application, the basic concept is data should be reloaded without user's knowledge. Without user's knowledge in the sense, you should be knowing that the data has changed, but you should not visually see the difference. You should not visually see that the page is getting reloaded. So this is the basic concept, and what handles this is Ajax. There's no difference about it. Second thing is, enables communication with backend servers without page refresh. So as you see, In our traditional ASP or JSP applications, backend has a bigger role that it generates data as well as it generates HTML. Then it combines data and HTML and renders the page. So the role of client was very minimal, just to show whatever returned by the client server it does. But as I said in my previous sessions, in any single page application, the role of client has increased. When you say the role of client has increased, it has the responsibility to hold the static HTML content as well as to bring data from the backend and bind it to the static HTML content. So the role, when the role of client-side frameworks or client browser is increased, we need something to do this work for us. We need something which takes data from the backend and binds that data to the client-side HTML content. So that will be taken care by AngularJS using some services which we are going to see now. So it's the same thing as I said, AngularJS provides rich built-in support. So Ajax, whatever it does, it is already present in the AngularJS. So different from the way ASP or JSP applications where the data and layout were merged at the server to generate HTML, which was streamed to the browser. The same thing which I said right now. Okay. So now just we saw what is the basic requirement for AngularJS server-side communication. So basically Ajax, and it is already present in the AngularJS. Second thing which we are going to see about is REST. Definitions are there. Apart from this definition, can anyone tell me what you already know about REST? Or what is REST, how it differs from other way of communication? Normal computer science question, right? REST communication. Don't go in the definitions. Actually, this term is pretty much easier one, but difficult to understand. Why means, as the statement says, REST stands for representational state transfer. Will come from the last word, transfer. Very simple. Transfer data both ways, client to server or from server side to client side. That is statement. Second thing is state transfer. What is a state? The word state has different meanings based on the context. In this context, can anybody tell me what is state? Partial include, yes. Type of object. Type of object. That's the answer. So basically, you can transfer any kind of data from server to client side, right? For example, if I'm passing this simple JSON from server to client side, this can be interpreted in different ways. One way is just show this entire content in your page. Plain text. Whatever coming from your server side, just show it. Will take even for complex. Assume this is the text coming from the backend. Okay. This can be shown like the same text can be displayed here, or the browser is clever enough to understand the text which comes from the backend is an HTML text. So instead of showing this, just highlight this text. Okay. Also now assume we are sending an image, a JPEG image. Image will not be returned in the, as the same image will not be returned from browser to client side, right? We cannot transfer the image as such. It is converted into machine understandable language. But when an image is coming from background to the server to client side, your client should be clever enough to interpret it correctly and show the image as image instead of showing the comment text as a simple plain text here. You get my point? So the data which is transferred from server to client side can be of anything: image, sound, music, or plain JSON or XML. It can be of any type. But how your browser knows whether the transferred text belongs to a particular type is taken care by REST. So that is the state transfer. So along with your data, the state also gets transferred from server side to client side. So whenever if someone asks this question, what is REST? This is the answer. You don't have to say anything else. Get my point? So along with data, if you are sending the representation also from server side to client side, that type of transfer is called as REST. Okay. Then you can ask me, what are the other type of transfers? This is one way. What is another type of transfer? There is only one more thing available, which is called as resource-based transfer. In the resource-based transfer, you will not send what type of data your client has to interpret. You will just send the content as such. Okay. For example, if there is a URL like you are making a simple get call. Okay. This user is there, right? This is resource. So that user, if you just pass ID, it will send all the user details. But what type of user, what you have to do with that user, that type of data representation will be sent by the REST. Very simple. You get my point? What is REST? So as per the definition, it's an architectural pattern for developing web services, as opposed to a specification. Specification is nothing but specification will just send the resource, but in addition to the resource, if there is a pattern which supports the state transfer as well, then it is called as REST. The REST web services communicate over the HTTP specification, Hypertext Transfer Protocol is common, using HTTP vocabularies. These four are very important part of any HTTP communication. I don't think I have to explain all this because it's pretty clear, right? So in any HTTP transfer, these four things will be seen. For example, if you are using a web application, if you make some calls with the backend, say get or post call, just go to the web developer. In the network tab, you can see all these details, right? So for example, what type of method it is, whether you are making a get request or post request. Get means you are asking something using ID. Post means you are saving or sending the data back to the server. And the second important thing is you will see if there are any additional parameters which are passed with the request. For example, if you are saving some data, you have to pass some JSON data or some other XML data to the server, right? So extra additional informations are present in this HTTP URL syntax. Third thing is media types. As I mentioned earlier, the type of transfer is not only restricted to plain text, it can be of any type, XML, JSON or whatever it is. And finally, you will have an HTML response code. What is the role of the response code? Success or failure or what type of response it is sending. So what you have to understand from this is the browsers are clever enough nowadays in order to interpret the results, because in like say 10 years back, if you are getting success with the request, or if your request is getting failed, then that representation will not be sent to client at all. Success or failure, all the data will be interpreted on the server side. The content the user should see will also be manipulated on the server side itself. Only the final plain HTML text are transferred. But since nowadays we have an advanced technology where you can pass all these informations to the client side along with the data, the amount of burden is reduced on the server side. And because of that reason, performance of the web applications have improved to a greater extent. Yeah. So this is also one way the answer for why you should go for AngularJS or any single page applications, because your the burden on the server side is getting reduced. Again, we will just text. Yeah, this is the example actually I explained. So first you have to understand what is the resource before you get to the point of representation. Resource is nothing but oriented model to expose their services. It creates a uniform interface by mapping HTTP methods. Okay, this is another point. In HTTP, you have different ways by which you can transfer the data using HTTP. But with the REST, there is a uniform way. And what is that uniform way? A uniform syntax to handle basic CRUD operations using these 4 methods. For example, if you are using a normal web application, you might have noticed that you pass data using query strings and all, right? So I think the question mark and all, for example, this one. Okay, but nowadays with the REST or with web APIs, you don't have to do these things. Instead, the syntax will be simple like that, like this. So whether you are saving a data or whether you are getting some data, the syntax will be same. So here you can see I am doing 2 complete different operations. The first thing what I am doing is I am getting data from the backend. And the second thing I am going to delete that particular user. So here I am getting the user detail and here I am deleting that particular user detail. But if you see the URL that is passed from the client to server via HTTP, it will be same. Then how you are going to differentiate the operation between these 2 URLs means what type of request you are going to make. Okay, but in the previous days you have to do like this. For example, if you are going to read, then you have to mention the user, then you have to give this optional parameters with question mark ID equal to 1. And if you want to delete the same thing, then you have to mention this word delete, using which you will identify the service on the server side. But nowadays you can simply leave user/1. So what this resource has done to us means it has created a uniform interface by mapping the HTTP. Now you can ask me, just to change this one, should I go for this methods? How it is helpful in nowadays programming means you can go for some generic methods using this signature. Okay. For example, assume you have a controller, and in that controller you have a method. Previously, what we used to do, we need to give some unique names to each method to identify from the client side. But nowadays, what we can do is we can have same name methods, but just by changing the signature, we can reuse those methods. Okay. This also explains it better. Let us take this for example. Here, post, get, put, and delete are methods. This URL, these 4 types are methods which are transferred from the client to the server side. Then the URL which you see here are URIs, and user/1, whatever it ends with, this user is there, right? This is called as resource, which I explained in the previous slide. And this request returns some data, right? So whatever we have done now is from client to the server side. These 4 queries goes from the client to the server side. These are methods. these are URIs, and this user represents the resource which you want to fetch from the server side. After executing these URLs, whatever returned from the server to the client side is nothing but a representation. And this is the data that is returned. And if you just simply return this JSON data, browser cannot identify how to interpret it. So along with this JSON data, it will send a representation to mention what type of data it is. If it is JSON, your client uses it like a JSON data. Otherwise, based on that type, like XML or JPEG, it identifies the data. So it has answer for the rest. If you understand this one, entire rest is over. Questions?
Like more than one parameter, so how it will be? One more slash and one, right?
More than one parameter.
Say,
Actually, generally what we do means if there are more than one parameter, it is better to go with the post with the body object.
for on the question, for security reasons, we easily will not send. For security reasons, we usually don't send unique IDs, which is in the database table in the query string. As you said, we always go for post equals.
So as you can see here, this is what I was talking about now. So I have made this request is nothing but a list. So I've just sent the resource name list, and in that one, these are the informations. You might have seen this so many times, right? So first thing that is passed along is the URL. You can see I have mentioned nothing in this one. I've just mentioned the resource name category. Even this list is optional only. Just for my understanding, I have named it as list. Even if I don't keep this list, it is correctly going to identify the particular API. And then I have to mention what type of call it is. Post. How this has to be done with AngularJS, we'll see in a few minutes from now. Then this is the response code which I was talking about. It will return the response code. So along with this, these informations are set and status code is written. So the first thing browser what it will do is it will go to check the status code. What type of status it has returned. If it is failed, then it will not proceed further. Only if it is 200 OK, then it goes to the next section where we have response status. And in this response header, this is the thing you have to understand thoroughly. The content type is application/JSON. So this is the what representation, whatever I said in my previous slides. This is what I was talking about. So along with the response, it is saying that it has returned a JSON data. So once it is successful, once it has identified the content type as JSON, it actually goes and reads the JSON, reads the response as a JSON. For example, instead of sending application/JSON, if I say application/JPEG, then whatever response came with this request, it will read it as a JPEG. That's it. So once it is successful and once it knows what type of data has returned, then it goes and reads data. Okay, if my response has returned it as JPEG, even though it's a JSON data, it will try to interpret it as JPEG. Okay. The next thing is, so till now we are talking about how the request is made from client to server. On the server side, also it has to the server methods needs to know like from where details has to be obtained from the client. For example, if I am posting some data, say I am saving a user's data, I have user name, all those information in a JSON. Okay, and I have an API method on my client side in the controller. In that API method, from where it has to search for the data is decided by these parameters. So this is a typical web API you will use along with AngularJS applications. So as you can see here, I have a route information where I have mentioned API/forum. Okay, I didn't mention like API/forum, create new or delete or nothing. Okay, I just said API/forum. So it goes and searches for a controller called forum controller and it finds it. After finding it, based on what type of method I have requested, whether it is post, put, delete or get, it finds the next one, post. So resource is there, what type of method is also there. Then it comes to this method. But this is not enough. Once it has came to create forum, I need this forum object to be saved into the database. Right? If you did not mention this parameter called from body, it doesn't know from where to get that post object. Okay, but there are two types of objects that can be passed from client to server side. One is called as primitive, second one is complex. Primitive means, for example, if you just want to send the ID from client to server side, for example, if you are making GET request and if you want to just pass the ID, then what you can say is you don't have to mention this from body, you just mention int ID. Since integer is a primitive type, it will automatically identify that one. But this forum is my complex type. It's a class object which can have different type of properties. And since it's a complex type, you have to mention this parameter because many people what they do is if they let everything perfectly, but data will not be returned here. It will be simply coming as null. So in order to avoid that problem, you always have to mention what type of call it is. I mean, what type of data is transferred from the client to server, and that will be identified from this parameter from body. And like from body, you have other things like from form, from header, like as it is mentioned next to from, whether the server has to find the data from the body or from the request header or from the query parameter. Sometimes what you can do means you can also use web APIs using query parameters. In that case, if you want to get the data from the query parameters, you can simply mention it as from query. Okay. Till now, whatever we have seen is what is REST, then what is the how you make calls from the client side to the server side. When you make a call, what all the parameters pass from client to server. If the request is successful, how the data is returned, and how you have to expect data from the server side. These are the things we have seen till now. Any questions? This one? Because next thing we are going to see is how to do this with Angular. So before going into this, any questions till now? So the next thing which we are going to see is Now I have an API method with me, fine. I have AngularJS client side application, fine. How my Angular is going to communicate with the backend? This is very important because till now you have two different things. Now you need something to link the service side with the client side, and that will be handled by these two type of services. There are other type of services as well in Angular, but the most commonly used services for communication between server and the client side is $HTTP and $resource. 75% we use HTTP, remaining 25% we use resource based on the requirement. I'll tell you the difference in which scenario you have to go with which one. But these two are inbuilt one. You will not believe it will reduce lot of burden for developers to communicate it easily with the server side. Okay. So the first thing which you are going to see is $HTTP. And what is it? As I said earlier, there are certain different type of things that comes with Angular, right? Controllers, directives, services, factories, and all. And there are directives which are inbuilt. For example, give me names of some inbuilt directives. NGI. So likewise, we have inbuilt service called $HTTP. So it's a core Angular service. So if you are using an Angular application, if you want to communicate with the server, first thing you will use is $HTTP. And it is based on the deferred promise APIs exposed by users. Did anyone taught you what is deferred in previous sessions? Services and boundaries over it. Last session was service. Didn't taught you deferred. What is deferred? Promise. What is it?
It's like a form.
Okay, and the queue. So one of the interesting thing that Angular provides us is deferred promise services. What is the deferred promise means? For a few seconds, just forget about the service concept and all. Let us assume you are making a request to the server side. For example, get all the users present in my application. And assume you have millions of users in your database. You have 3 steps to do. First thing is get users. Second thing is once users are returned, validate them. Third thing is after validating, if they are valid, then show their names to the client via browser. You have 3 things to do. Assume this step takes say 20 seconds. Unfortunately, it should not take 20 seconds. Assume it takes 20 seconds. How a user knows first of all whether it returned the data in 20 seconds or whether it is failed. Because when you are communicating with the server, anything can happen. Everything goes well, data return, database connection get interrupted, fail. So anything can happen, right? So 2 things can happen here, success or failure. Okay, now it goes, if success, if failure. What do you have to do in these 2 scenarios? Till now what we'll do, we'll make a request, wait for the data to return, based on the data and do this. This is old style of programming. AngularJS gives us a service or that is also called a service, $Q, that does this work for us. So what you have to write means, you just have to write a then function. Then you have to write an else function. Okay. So when a request is made, it is made asynchronously. What is asynchronous called? Doesn't wait it. So doesn't wait for the service to return the data. So if you have 2 get methods and if this operation is going to take 20 seconds, then your browser should not wait for this to complete. It should automatically go to the second one. But when you have just terminated this and automatically went for the second request, what will happen with the operations that needs to be done here? I need not wait it. That's correct. But when it is successful or failure, something should happen, right? So that will be taken care by this deferred promise concept. So what this deferred promise does means, make a request. If it is successful, what you have to do, mention here. If it is failed, what you have to do, mention here. Then just go to the next method. Even though the second method is getting executed, while executing the second method, if the first method has returned the data, it will automatically do those actions for you. Okay? In this scenario, these three are interdependent on each other, right? First it has to get completed, then it has to validate, then it has to identify, show the user. Assume there are same set of three methods which are not dependent on each other. First thing is you have to get the students. Second thing is you have to get the teachers. Third thing is you are going to do something. These two are not depending on each other. Now what should happen? Obviously, I should not wait for this method's result to return, right? So in this scenario, we'll use that previous thing. Okay. In this scenario, when they are depending on each other, when there are set of action has to happen next, then you can't write like if successful, then second scenario if successful, then third scenario if successful. If failure, then again, write different methods. So this problem will be avoided by the deferred promise. Okay. So coming back to our slide, this HTTP uses this deferred promise concept. So deferred promise is another concept in AngularJS, but the $HTTP service, which is used for communicating with the backend, automatically uses this deferred promise. We'll see with an example, don't worry. But for now, just understand this deferred promise concept will be used by HTTP. So whenever you make a call, you don't have to wait. You don't have to worry about the next step of actions. You can simply write a code with HTTP. It will automatically take care using the then else functions. Okay. The third thing is common. The HTTP comes with the default CRUD operation methods get, set, post. Yeah. The next thing is auto transforming the request response. Whatever I spoke for the first half an hour, based on the representation, whether it's a JSON or JPEG, the client will understand, the client will interpret. I keep on saying that, right? The client will do, client will do, client will do. Client will not automatically do it. This $HTTP will do it. It has inbuilt code written to identify the representation of the data and convert the data to the particular format. Okay, so that is also coming along with $HTTP. The next important advantage with $HTTP is cache support. For example, as I asked in the first question, Ajax is used to change a particular portion of the page. Okay, which means other portion of the page is going to be same, right? So you don't have to get all the other contents of the page every time. Then what you have to do, you have to cache it somewhere. Previously, what we used to do means we use a server cache where we store the data and just return it without fetching it from the database again and again. But now what we are going to do is moving a step forward. Don't go to server at all. Just save that first time fetch data in the client side cache, which is already present in $HTTP. The initial days, we always used to fetch the data from the database. First request, second request, third request, fetch the data again and again from database. We improved a little bit. We saved the data in the server cache, and every time we return from the server cache. And now we have further improved and just kept everything in the client cache. This is how we have improved. Okay. So this caching support is also provided by $HTTP. So if someone asks you, why you are going with $HTTP and not going with $resource. These are the advantages you have to point out. Caching support, inbuilt methods, deferred promise concept, and the final thing is request and response. This is there with all type of services, but all the other three things are comes only with $HTTP. Okay. You may see in any AngularJS application, if somebody is communicating with the backend, predominantly they will go with $HTTP, and these are the reasons for that. The syntax is very simple, but why we are going with this $HTTP is the only thing you have to remember always. Final thing is interceptors. So whatever then else and all I said, right? These things are called as interceptors. So how it intercepts the request and response, and based on the response, how it intelligently identifies the response as well as intelligently behaves with the data. Because when the data comes, it's a static thing, right? What you have to do with data will be intelligently done by $HTTP. Okay? So as you can see here, it's a simple syntax of how to use $HTTP. First, you use that service. Like first thing you have to do is in your model you have to inject. How to inject that we already saw, right, in the previous sessions. If you have a service, just inject $HTTP. It's very simple. You just have to inject in $HTTP, right? Then once you have injected, you have to call a method. This is service, which you saw in your previous session. This is a service in my project. So what I have done, list advanced. I have written a method to fetch the data from the backend. And since I am passing a lot of search parameters, instead of going with get, I have used post method. So $HTTP.post. And the first thing is which URL you have to identify. Then I have given that category/list. I showed one API, right? It's the same routing signature. Then comma, you have to pass the model. If it is a GET request, if you are not passing a body, then what you have to do means instead of comma, you just have to place a plus, pass one like this. For example, if it is GET by ID, then URL /plus ID, and this ID is nothing but whatever 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever IDs you have to search. Once the request is made, so till this a normal AJAX will do. Any AJAX call follows the same signature. But with HTTP, the additional things what you can do is this, then and error function. Okay. So what this then will do is based on the response returned by it. So how it will identify what type of response it is? Response codes. So if it is 200, it executes whatever present inside then. If it is something other than 200, then it comes to this function error. Just a normal comma. After then, if you are placing a comma and writing a function, it means whenever there is a failure, it executes the code which is present inside this, and if it is success, it executes this code. Easy, right? If you have to do the same thing with your normal JavaScript programming, it's a complex thing because you don't know what type of response comes. Then for each response, you have to write a code that handles different type of responses. But it does it automatically for us. Okay. And whatever is done here, it will return a single promise. Okay. So initially, there is a service called as queue. Whatever default promise I explained it here, right? All those codes are present inside this queue service. So first you have to create a service object, then that service will return a promise. This promise consists of any type of thing. If it is successful, whatever you have returned here, that will be returned. If it is failure, for example, what I have done, I have written a factory that shows an error message to the user. So this promise will return that error message. Okay, so now you understood what's a promise, what is then, what is error, How to make HTTP? Done with services.
Now Ajax can also we have dot success dot error.
Yeah, dot success dot error. And so next thing, what you can do means you can do sequential actions. Like if you have some 10 actions to do in next steps, then you can easily do with this. Then you have to separately write code for each function. All these things are already explained except this JSON-P. So what it is saying is HTTP is a basic building block for communication via browsers HTTP XHR request or via JSON-P. There are two ways. The first way is XHR request, whatever we saw now XHR request. Okay. There is another way. In some cases we will use JSON-P. What is this JSON-P means? JSON with padding. For example, if you assume you are using a secure website, what's a secure website? Instead of HTTP, you use HTTPS, right? So when you are accessing some resources from a different secure website, like it's in a different domain, okay, then it will not allow you to access those resources. It will throw you the same margin policy errors, right? So in those cases, what you can use means you can use JSON-P. But it's a rare case. Otherwise, because generally whatever your website is going to access, it will be present in the same domain or in your friendly domain itself instead of this thing. So what I'm just coming to say is, with HTTP there is an additional advantage with which you can avoid the same margin policy errors using JSON-P. So it comes with these 4 methods: asynchronous request, promises. This is what I was talking about. Chain promises. First thing you saw was promise. Now there is something called a chain promise. For example, using this get, I'm first logging in. So after logging in, I'm getting the request. So store the user ID. First thing what it has to do means, once logged in, store the user ID and get what are the permissions. Permission means what are the roles that particular user can access. And once you have what are the roles you can access, second thing you have to do is store the permission and get the list. For example, for the user, what are the additional things it can see? Fetching of those lists has to be done in the second step. And once the permissions are there, show something to the user. The 3 steps which I showed you. So you can simply write like this. It will automatically handle. And if it fails in any one of these steps, you don't have to write a separate catch function. Rather than you can write a single catch function which catches any error happens in any one of these steps and show that particular error to the user. So this is called as chain promises. Previously whatever we saw with then an error is a promise, this is nothing but a chain promise. Okay, even if you have 100 functions to do, just write in a single method. The last advantage we saw was HTTP caching, right? So if you have something, you can always keep it in the client side itself rather than keeping it in the server side. So this is how HTTP caching is done. Very simple. You just have to learn these 4 syntax. First thing is, with HTTP, if you are first of all, if you want to cache the data, because sometimes there are some critical information like user details and all which you don't want to keep it in the browser. In that case, you have to mention this as cache calls. I think by default it's cache calls, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you want to keep the data in the client side, just leave it as cache true. Disadvantage with the cache true is, if you want to refresh particular section of the page, then it will not do it manually. You have to refresh the page. For example, say I have 2 windows. In first window I am listing the user. In the second window I am going to add a user. So once the user is added, immediately this new added user has to be reflected in the list. Means if you just put cache equal to 2, it will not happen, because it will again and again show the data from the old data. But instead of this situation, if you have the first page, where you want to show the data which will not be changed quite frequently, then you can keep it as cache true. Okay, so now the data is cached. So whatever written from this API path with this URL, that data will be cached. Now once the data is cached, how to fetch? You can use another service which is provided by the Angular called as Cache Factory. So use that service, .get, and then put $HTTP. If you use this, it will return all the caches which are present, which were written in that application. So if you have 5 URLs, if you have fetched the data using 5 URLs, all those 5 caches will be present here. Okay. Now, if you want to fetch that particular cache alone, then you can use this syntax. So first get this one. So in this HTTP cache object, you will have all the caches, and from that just put .get and give this API path name, and this cache data will be returned. So what you can clearly see from this is, for doing cache, instead of writing so much code, there are already available services like Cache Factory and Cache True Property with which you can do this. And it's not like you always have to mention that particular URL path alone for the cache. You can also give your own name for that. So all these things will be present in your browser. If you clear the browser cache and cookies, it will disappear, of course. But if you have a rich UI where you have a lot of controls, lot of data fetched in the first instance, and second time if you don't want the user to feel that frustration, you can go with this cache and handle cache using this. Because I will share this PPT with you, so just go with the learn this syntax. Okay, fine. So whatever we saw till now, that itself is more than enough to start with to practice communicating backend with client. But the second way, which I mentioned in the previous slide, is one is $HTTP. The second one is $resource. $resource is nothing but an additional service built over $HTTP. So if you are using $resource, internally it is going to use $HTTP only. But the thing is, it has some inbuilt methods even to ease our work even more. So using $HTTP, if you are doing some works in chained promises, the second step and all you did something right, then inside then again you are calling another service, right? So instead of doing that, if you want to do some action with the data returned from the backend, data is written. Using the data, if you want to do some additional stuff, you have some methods inbuilt in this $resource. So for example, $resource create a resource object which is returned from the backend and lets you interact with RESTful server-side methods. Okay, it has some inbuilt methods called get, save, query, remove, delete. For example, you are fetching some data, some 10 user data from user. After that, if you don't want one particular record in that, then what you have to do with HTTP, you have to make an additional new call, right? $delete. So instead of doing that, once the data is returned, you will get an object. Here the object is nothing but user, and just put user.delete.id. So from the 10 users returned from the client server side, if you can pass one ID, that data will be removed. Okay? But again, remember, if you are using any other type of services than REST, then you should not go with $resource. $resource is only for REST services. If you are using any other services apart from REST, then you can go with $HTTP always. Okay? Yeah, just remember, if you want to use resource, you have to include this JS file in your HTML index.html file. So an example is given here. For example, if I am passing a user ID, I will get user object. Then after user, getting the user, I just want to modify one or two properties and save it again. Then it gives an inbuilt method called as $save. So that you don't have to make an additional API call to save after fetching the data. It's like update. Take the data, update some property, save means it has some inbuilt method which does it for you. You don't have to write a new API call for that. are the differences between $HTTP and resource. As I said, $HTTP is a normal AJAX, but $resource is built on top of HTTP that is specifically for the RESTful services alone. Remember this, if you're not using RESTful services, don't go with $resource, always go with $HTTP. $HTTP return promises, as we saw, but $resource doesn't return any promise at all. It will just return an object using which you can do additional functions like .save, .delete and all. But if you are using $HTTP, after in the promise, inside the promise, you have to do the additional operation. But $resource object itself accompanied with inbuilt methods that does for you, as we saw in the previous example. So in simple words, if REST is what all you need, just go with $resource. If there are also possibilities of using other type of methods, go with $HTTP. Any questions? Anything from REST, Web APIs, $HTTP, $resource, syntax, promises. I assume everything is clear, right? Okay, thank you.